Welcome back to the workbench. After doing the initial rust removal and dial restringing in the previous part of this restoration, it's now time to move on to the capacitors. As you can see, the radio looks to be untouched on the inside, still has all of the paper capacitors in place. So at this point I'm ready to go ahead and start the work on doing the capacitor replacement, and as I go through and do that work I'll also be testing the resistors and making sure that they remain in tolerance and replacing any of those that are out of tolerance. Got a pile of capacitors waiting to go in over here and a few more beyond that, so it's time to get started. This 0.05, and we're going to replace this one. Instead of with a normal paper capacitor, I'm going to use this guy, 0.05, and this is a safety capacitor. And the reason for that is this particular 0.05 on the schematic turns out to be this capacitor right here. And if you can see from that, that's one side of the line through the capacitor right to ground. So we're going to use a modern safety capacitor for that one. In the process of changing the capacitors, I've also been measuring resistors. And I found that R10 in the circuit, which is a 100 ohm 2 watt resistor, was measuring about 270 ohms. So in the process of making sure that I was in fact measuring about 270 ohms on that resistor, I decided to disconnect one end, and as I did, the resistor came apart in two pieces. So clearly you can see that that one was defective. So going through my stash of available parts, I don't have anything that's 100 ohms in the 2 watt range. So for now I'm going to insert a 100 ohm 10 watt. That's a little large, but I think I'll have room. You'll also notice that I'm working on changing the electrolytic capacitor. The original electrolytic capacitor was in this can, and so I have replaced that by relocating the wires that ran to the original tabs on the can to this terminal strip, and that's where one end of this 100 ohm resistor will go. After completing the capacitor replacement, I went on to power the radio up. On the first power up, I realized we had no tube filaments, even though we had gone through and checked all the tubes, so I knew the tube filaments themselves were good, but the series string tubes were not lighting up. So as we take a look at the schematic and we look at the tube string, you'll notice that in addition to the series connection for all the tube filaments, we also have a couple of chokes that are in series with the tube filaments. And what I found is that one of those coils, one of those chokes in the tube filament string was open. And so here we have the coil that was bad, a 2.2 microhenry. So I have replaced the coil with this guy right here, which got my series string back all intact, and I was able to power up the radio and get the tubes to light up and begin to go ahead and with the rest of the radio restoration. What I noticed after that was that we had oscillator for the FM mode running, but in the AM mode the oscillator was not running, so hence we had no AM radio reception. So a little closer look at what was going on there, and ended up having a couple of resistors, this 33K here and this 47K that were slightly out of tolerance. Normally I wouldn't have suspected they would have been out of tolerance enough to cause any great concern, but in this case I went ahead and replaced those, which got my AM oscillator back running. This radio also has a selenium rectifier, which we see right here, and I've elected to go ahead and replace the selenium rectifier with their more modern traditional diode. As we see in the schematic, the rectifier diode here. Typically, as you replace the selenium rectifier with a modern day rectifier, you need to add a little bit more resistance in that path, in that serial path right here, because selenium rectifier has a higher internal resistance than a modern day diode. So here's the new diode that I've used to replace the selenium diode, and then we have here a resistor, a little overkill for the size, but just what I happen to have around. But we have, I believe that's an extra 15 ohms in series to sort of replicate the internal series resistance that the selenium rectifier would have. And afterwards, initial power up, I did measure that power supply voltage, and as we can see on the schematic, we should have 106 volts here at pin 6 of the 50C5 for the power supply, and in fact we have almost exactly 106 volts now with the new diode and resistor arrangement. Okay, we now have the radio powered up and playing in the AM mode. You'll notice that the sound quality is not really good, and I believe one of the things that's causing the sound quality to be bad right now, if you'll notice, if I stick the screwdriver back in here, is the fact that the speaker now, let's see if I can get a better shot of that, that the speaker has come unglued from the frame. So I'm going to need to go back around and see can I re-secure the cone of the speaker around the edge back to the frame. It's just rattling quite bad and makes it sound a bit distorted sounding. And we'll also switch over to the FM mode.
To you and your loved ones are built. Call Navy Mutual.
And you can definitely hear on that the rattle of the speaker.
For your personal life insurance plan consultation. 1-800-628-6011 or NavyMutual.org. Navy Mutual, insuring.
The radio still needs alignment, a little further checking, but it is up and playing at this point.
Introducing the spectacular new premium McRack, a dazzling fusion of tender.
Okay, radio's all cleaned up and all back together now after the capacitor changes and a little bit of touch up on the alignment, and have it now, so it's all ready and playing.
Unfortunately, the gal he decided to dance with had a boyfriend who was none too keen to see his lady cutting a rug with another fella. And he was armed with both a hot temper and a gun. Our question is, what's the name of the girl our guy was dancing with?
Ready for another 40 or 50 years worth of use. And as one final look, here's the pile of parts that were all replaced. Thanks for watching.